Welcome to the Bladder Cancer Canada podcast. I'm your host, Summer Stewart, volunteer with Bladder Cancer Canada. As the first and only Canadian patient advocacy organization dedicated to bladder cancer issues, Bladder Cancer Canada is proud to provide patients, their caregivers, and families with the support and resources they need to navigate a bladder cancer diagnosis. Through patient support, awareness, and research, our vision is to create a world where bladder cancer is just a memory. While Bladder Cancer Canada strives to support Canadians in their diagnosis and journey, we hope that anyone listening from around the world can benefit from these discussions and know we support you too. As a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended for medical advice. If you need medical information, please speak to your physician. Today, we welcome Rob to share his story. Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for sharing your story on the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, Summer. Thanks for having me on.
Wonderful. I was hoping to start with maybe you telling us a little bit about you and your background.
Okay, well, I'm 64 years old and I have a Neobladder. I had surgery 10 years ago in April, actually. So I've been living with it quite a while. I was born in Brantford, Ontario, but have spent most of my life in Belleville, Ontario, which is where my wife Cheryl and I live now. What else to say? Well, we have two boys. They're grown men now, I guess, not boys. One lives in Vancouver, one lives in Ottawa, and we travel quite a bit together, Cheryl and I. And this summer, we're actually doing a vacation with our kids and their partners. So we're looking forward to that.
Oh, wonderful. That sounds exciting.
I'm a self-employed IT professional. I do network support for clients. I'm unsuccessfully attempting to retire. My clients are not really in favor of that. My wife has been retired for 3 years, so I have my clients wanted me to stay. My wife wanted me to get on with it, but I'm enjoying what I do, and so I'm slowly trying to cut back.
Wonderful. Maybe you could walk us through the first signs or symptoms and what led you to seek medical attention and eventually discover that you had bladder cancer.
Really, it's the same as most people. I had blood in my urine. So this was 10 years ago right now when I first detected it. My wife and I were in Miami, South Miami, actually. She was working for a company down there, and because I could work remotely, we were living down there for just a couple months. Soon after arriving, I had blood in my urine, went to a hospital there, and then saw a urologist, and they sent the results up to my doctor, who got me set up with a urologist here, which led me to have a turbot, which is them going in and taking a sample of what they found in there and determined that I had bladder cancer.
Okay, and then what was your official diagnosis then?
Stage 2 muscle invasive.
Okay. And what were the treatment options that you were given at that time of the diagnosis?
There was one treatment option. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of options when it's muscle invasive. So the only option that existed was a radical cystectomy. It was determined the tumor was likely still in the bladder, which was sort of, another part to this story is that 6 months prior to that, I'd had a minor heart attack.
Oh, dear.
And when I had that, it turned out I have what's I referred to as a bonus artery. I have a small fourth artery, and that's where the blockage was. But they put me on blood thinners and some pretty aggressive blood thinners. So the blood thinners caused the tumor to bleed early, which meant I had a very early detection. So the thought was that the tumor had not gotten through the bladder wall, and so they wanted to get it out quickly.
Right. Wow. Bonus artery ended up being a little bit of a blessing in disguise, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you decide to go with a Neobladder then? And were you counseled on the type of diversions that were available to you?
Well, from the time of my diagnosis, so not from the turbot, but once we met with the urologist, they had the pathology back. to the time of my surgery was 2.5 weeks. There was not a lot of time to think about it. In fact, I'd say, sort of shut down when the doctor said I had cancer. So, fortunately, my wife was with me at the time, and she sort of took the reins as far as doing research and everything and understanding things. But immediately, my urologist, and then when I met with the surgeon, both said, you're a good candidate for a neobladder, kind of explained the advantages of it. And so I just sort of, took their word that it was the best option for me. But really, like I said, it was a very short time frame. I was just kind of along for the ride.
As you know, I believe that this is something that's common with patients that are newly diagnosed with cancer. I think that you kind of check out at that point. It's a shock.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's great that you had your wife as a support there as well. It's really important to have kind of an extra set of ears to be catching the information that you're missing.
Yes, because I missed a lot, I'll tell you.
Did you receive any other treatments after the surgery?
No. So again, because they felt it was contained at that point, they wanted to just get it out quickly. So there was no time for chemo in advance, or it didn't seem to be an advantage to do so. But during the surgery, they're testing everything, doing pathology as they're in there on ureters and the urethra. And then afterwards, they do pathology on the bladder and the prostate. And they were able to determine there was nothing on the margins, so there was no value in having chemo after that. So I was very fortunate because I work with patients that have had to go through chemo, and it's, if it's necessary, it's necessary, and it's a good thing to do that and shrink the tumor. But I really don't envy what they have to go through.
Yeah, it's not easy. Did you experience any learning curves with your neobladder, and how did you kind of deal with that?
Well, so first there was just recovery from the surgery, which was about 6 weeks. Now, I found it reasonable to deal with. I kind of took the reins at that point and managed all the post-operative things. So when you get a neobladder, you have to do irrigations every 4 hours, sort of thing, during the
Okay.
day. And that's to do with clearing the mucus out of the neobladder because it's now a piece of small intestine that's is always going to continue to produce mucus. So while you're healing before it goes into production, there's processes there, there's wound care, there's other, just emptying bags, things like that. And you know, it was just a process, and you just have to sort of accept that and go through it. And when you're past it, you're happy to be past it, but now you're dealing with the neobladder, which is a challenge in itself. So, I really and again, I counsel patients on this, and it's a challenge, but again, not insurmountable. It's something that you just have to go through again the steps, learn how to know when you have to go to the bathroom and stuff, and then continence for most neobladder patients happens almost immediately during the day. So, you're going to have some minor incidents as you learn, but it's really not that difficult in my experience.
Hmm.
Now, nighttime's another story. So it's a management that everybody has to deal with on their own. Some people will just, wear a Depends or something like that and get up when they have an incident. But I just, started off using an alarm. Fortunately, my wife, it didn't bother her too much, so I just get up every 2 hours. Now I just get up without that. So it's probably my age that's causing that more so than anything.
So it's really all about learning new routines.
It is. And it's really, like during the day, I would say it's the same as anybody else in the room, sort of thing, other than I don't have quite the same control that I had when I had a real bladder, if you
Okay.
will.
All right. So, the role of the healthcare providers is crucial in the cancer journey. How would you describe your interactions with your medical team and what made those interactions positive or challenging?
My urologist in town was great. He was very, once I got over the shock of everything. And honestly, I went in there thinking he was going to say something about a polyp or something, some happy little thing in there that they had to get rid of, but it was far worse than that. But he made things happen, and I couldn't have asked for a better surgeon. He also, identified or recognized that this thing needs to come out sooner than later and got me scheduled in very quickly. It was almost, my head was spinning. Things were going so fast.
Yeah.
But, he was good to deal with. He was very positive. And then when I had the surgery, they have a urology ward, and all the staff and nurses and everybody was very knowledgeable, and they dealt with this on a regular basis. And it was, I learned all I needed to learn about managing the Neo before it went into production,
Okay.
before it was doing its job. They just taught me everything. They made sure I went home with supplies. They made sure that I was hooked up with care when I got home. So I'm going to say I had no challenges with the healthcare providers or the system. Maybe it's Belleville, maybe it's my luck. I don't know, but I mountain bike a lot, and I breaks things on my body or in my body, and I always seem to get very good care. And there's no question our healthcare system has challenges, but you have to advocate for yourself. And it really helps if you have a partner or a friend or a brother, sister that can help you do that. But things went well, and my team was fantastic.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, so you had mentioned, when you were diagnosed with cancer, that you kind of went into shock. And coping with all of the information and what's coming at you can be overwhelming. A lot of patients experience fear and uncertainty. What strategies or coping mechanisms did you find most helpful during your journey? And what advice do you have for others facing a bladder cancer diagnosis?
Well, yeah, as you said, I guess that, one of the number one things is to have somebody help you.
Right.
Like I said, partner, friend, sibling, anybody. You really need somebody to help put context to what you're going through,
Mhm.
and to be there and have another set of ears every time you meet with your healthcare providers. And particularly if you're going through a different experience than I did, like if you have chemo and things like that's challenging to go through.
Right.
So that's I guess the first thing. And the other is to have, and it's not always easy, but a positive attitude. Develop a strategy that allows you to cope with what you're going through. Because, even though I had a good experience, it was parts of it were more challenging than I expected. Just having to walk the next morning after surgery
Oh, okay.
um, I was 54 at the time. I'm thinking this will be easy. And it was far from easy. I was very, I'm going to say, disappointed in how hard it was. I thought I would do better. I'm a very fit individual, not an athlete or anything, but I was physically well prepared. The other thing is, yeah, something to focus on. And for me, and this is maybe a little embarrassing, but I was in the hospital bed, and I would just say, well, at least you can still have a beer.
Yeah.
Like they weren't taking everything away from me.
Right.
And because that's how you kind of can feel, is that your life's going to change, and things won't, you won't have the things you enjoy. And not that that's my number one thing. It was just something simple to focus on.
Mm.
So, that's it, it's that knowing that or having confidence that you're going to have a future, and that your future is going to be enjoyable. And so you really need to focus on that.
Right. And so, what activities do you find that you can't do now? And how has your life kind of changed as far as, your lifestyle?
So, I mentioned I was from the time of surgery to the time where my Neo was, I keep referring to it as being in production, that now I don't have any tubes. And so the Neo has to work properly, was about 6 weeks. And at that point, I was back at work pretty much full time, other than driving back and forth to Toronto for appointments. And, work life was back. 6 months after my surgery, I ran my first race
Wow.
in Sydenham, Ontario, north of Kingston, which was an 8K race. And it was different, but I was able to train for that. I'd say the first 3 months were a bit, I don't want to say downtime, but I could golf, I could do all kinds of things, but until the connective tissues really built up in my body, the things that hold stuff in place, it just felt weird running and stuff. But by then I was doing that. But in the grand scheme of things, with a neobladder or a bag, any diversion. So there's also the Indiana pouch, which is not as common, but no matter what your diversion, you can skydive, you can scuba dive, you can mountain bike, you can do anything. There is no restriction on my life. I have nothing that I can't do. I do just have to, I'm not a big fan of camping anymore because of getting up in the night all the time.
Right, right.
So that's the only thing that's a downside, if you will, or that I have to manage is the nighttime continence. And, it's something that you just figure out how you're going to do it and you make it happen. And, I don't have, it would be pretty rare to have an incident at night. I don't have to sleep with pads or anything like that. It's just you learn how to deal with it. Now, I've been doing it a long time, so maybe easy for me to say. It's harder for the people that start because there is some, I'm going to say demoralizing things. If you wake up with a wet bed, it's emotionally difficult because you just don't know that that's going to end or not. So, I really I feel for what people have to go through when they start this. But, my wife and we're avid mountain bikers. We travel to the Midwest in the fall, usually each year. We have a small RV. Our cat Kaylee goes with us,
Oh, wow.
and she has a mountain bike, of course, but we do a lot of hiking in the national parks, and we mountain bike in Moab and Sedona, and my bladder is never on my mind at those points. It's just everything works as it should.
Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to share because patients who are, facing a neobladder or a diversion of some sort, even though they're going through maybe the first portion or the first steps of what that looks like for them, to hear somebody who's been through it for so long and who is now living a normal life as if it never really happened in a sense, it should be very encouraging to listeners.
I do a patient support volunteer, and I usually spend somebody who's considering a neo. They've already been told they need a radical cystectomy, but they are looking at which diversion they want to go with. And I spend an hour with them normally on the phone. And I always encourage them that if they have a partner there or their advocate, that, let's get everybody on the call,
Mhm.
that the outcomes, the process for going through the healing and the recovery are so out there for them. They can't fathom any of it. And at the end of that 1 hour, it just is such a relief for them. And so that's part of, like, as you just mentioned it's knowing what to expect and knowing that somebody, that I can portray my experience and that it's really not an impact on my life of any significance. So the sense of relief people have after just an hour is amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. So it sounds like support is essential for patients who are newly diagnosed with bladder cancer. and ongoing patients who are experiencing treatments for bladder cancer. Let me ask, how did you find Bladder Cancer Canada?
Well, as I mentioned, my wife sort of took the reins on a lot of things initially until I kind of got over my surprise. So we came home. She heard all the things I didn't hear, and so she started just Googling and came across Bladder Cancer Canada. So she used the website to track down resources and get links to other support ideas. And if you can imagine, that was 10 years ago. So the Bladder Cancer Canada website is so much more functional for patients now, but she just found it by that. And we pulled a lot of comforting information from there.
Right. So you mentioned that you do patient counseling. Is that through Bladder Cancer Canada?
It is, yeah. So part of what Bladder Cancer Canada offers is patient support where, and I'd asked for that actually when I met with my surgeon. So if I could give one fault, it's that didn't happen. But you can put a request in on the Bladder Cancer Canada website or reach out to Bladder Cancer Canada, and they will match you up with a patient that meets your, I'm going to say, specifications, if you will. Not that you specify it, but if you're a male, you get matched up with a male support volunteer. And if you're looking for a neobladder, then you will get somebody who has a neobladder. And if you're going to get a different diversion, you get matched up with somebody with that appropriate diversion. And so it's not uncommon though for a patient to talk to two or three people because they're trying to decide between the two.
Wow, what a wonderful resource. So, for the listeners out there, you can access these resources on bladdercancercanada.org. That is the full library of all the resources that we have and the resources that Rob is speaking about. What would you have done differently if you could go back, if anything?
Yeah, I wish there was something, not get bladder cancer, of course, but for me, again, it was just so out of my hands in a way. It just happened. And I will say, a neobladder to somebody in my age at the time and my fitness level, physique, whatever, just seemed logical, I think, to everybody, including the doctors, but to me as well, because it meant not having to deal with supplies and things like that. The challenge is, that it works properly. And for most people, it does, but there's always that risk. And not when I say works properly, it could mean that you just find it too challenging afterwards. So that's part of what we try to do as volunteers is, and again, we're not doctors. We learn a lot over time, and because we went through it, we kind of know a lot of what's going on in the background with this. But really, it's just giving the patient our experience. And at times, I've kind of questioned my experience only in that I was like the poster boy of neobladders. Like, I can't imagine it going any better than it did.
Oh, wow.
Hopefully that's the case for most people, but I don't often talk to people after they had their neo. I have a few patients that I have, and they've had similar experience. They've been very positive, but I had one person that I counseled that had their surgery during the pandemic, and it worked really well. Same doctor as me, in fact, but it was a challenge going through being at the hospital with having get dropped off at the front door and see you in a week sort of thing. But it's a great resource, and I as much as at some point I feel I'll become too distant from it to be as beneficial, but I do still, it's challenging. It's emotionally draining to some extent. It's like you're reliving it, but at the end of the 1 hour and the patient says, you can't believe how much better I feel. I don't feel as scared. That just makes it all worthwhile.
Well, thank you so much for being a patient counselor on behalf of Bladder Cancer Canada. It does sound like these diversions are very personal and there's a lot of differences between them. So to have this resource for patients who are, maybe in shock or maybe, have a lot of anxiety around this, I can imagine that the patients do feel quite a bit better after speaking to you. So thank you. Is there anything you were hoping to talk about today that we didn't touch base on?
I don't know other than to say that I think in the end I've sort of painted a positive picture of what the outcome is. I will say that I and probably every other neo or bag patient really would love to have our bladder back. It just it's different. You would have, hopefully a better experience in life. But having said that, the goal of this thing is to survive it and come out of it still being able to be with your loved ones and family, friends, and do the things you like to do and kind of, I guess, as much as possible, live a full life. And as I said, there's nothing I can't do. And well, I can't mountain bike very well sometimes. I will say that. I do break bones and things, but you can try anything. That's the important thing is so I just want to say that it's so important to have a positive outlook. We've all, we know so many people in life as you get older that have had cancer and or died from cancer. And that's not a good thing, but until it hits you, it was always like something as much as you dealt with it with family and friends and whoever may that you've touched, it's a different experience when it's you and that experience can be better, more successful if you look to the future and just be positive because mentally or emotionally it's very challenging to go through. It's challenging to go through somebody else having it, and it's challenging to go. And I would say, and maybe I'm going on too much about what I didn't touch, but in the end, parts of this were far more challenging for my wife than for me. When you're the patient, you have to kind of come to terms with certain things. And going into surgery, I was comfortable. Our kids were growing. That if something happened, but it's different when you're the one that's depending on your partner coming back to you. So it's an interesting and challenging experience, and I would hope not to ever go through it again, but I also hope not to ever have to go through it as the partner of somebody too. So, be supportive of people and again, just be positive and look to the future.
Oh, that's great advice. Absolutely great advice. So, everybody who's listening, hug your caretaker.
Yes, yes, very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rob, for taking the time to speak to Bladder Cancer Canada today on the podcast. We wish you all the success and health for the future, and we hope to speak to you again soon, when you're finally retired.
I'm looking forward to that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Rob.
Okay, thank you, Summer.
If you or someone you know has been diagnosed with bladder cancer Canada is here to help with support programs, informative resources, and educational sessions. Visit us at bladdercancercanada.org to access these resources and to share your story. Be sure to follow us on X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We will respond to messages sent on socials. If you are a bladder cancer patient or survivor and would like to share your story on the podcast, please contact us at info@bladdercancercanada.org.